Okay, well, welcome everyone to our first professional development seminar for the College of Veterinary Medicine graduate community. And it is my pleasure to introduce Jake Maas, who is the Director of Proposal Enhancement at the Office of Research, who is going to give us some insight into kind of an introduction to grant writing and submitting proposals. So thank you very much.
Sure, and thanks for having me. I don't have a clear idea of whether you folks out there are planning on submitting grants in the near future, or whether you are more interested generally as part of professional development about grant writing, the grant writing process. So feel free to comment in the chat and I'll sort of glance at that so I can, as we go, I can be thinking about how to tailor this a little bit more. We'll see how that goes on the fly. The presentation is fairly general. It's not focused on one specific agency, and it's not focused on a certain type of grant. If you're planning as a graduate student on applying for a fellowship, then the principles are still generally applicable, but it's probably most applicable to you. It will be throughout your career as you finish your PhDs and start to do a postdoc or become a faculty member somewhere. And again, the principles are broadly applicable. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. One moment. And oh yeah, I forgot about this aspect of it. And in case you arrived late, you may hear some tromping around, and that's because we have rats in our attic. And of course, the critter control folks were late. So if someone suddenly falls through the ceiling, there will be a brief pause while we deal with that situation. Okay, so you can see my PowerPoint. So just a little bit about me. So I direct a small office called the Office for Proposal Enhancement. And our main goal is to get large, complex grants funded at UGA. We also help faculty on an individual basis, and down at the bottom of our list of things we can do is to help graduate students, although we can certainly direct you to resources. We literally have 2 people right now, and one of them just started a month ago. So I have taught a grant writing class for graduate students in the past, and we might reoffer that depending on people's schedules. There are also, opportunities for grant writing classes available across campus, sort of within various departments. I don't know if VetMed has one specifically, but ours was sort of a catch-all for anyone who couldn't find one to take. So I've called this, so my background is in English, actually. And so I come at grant writing from the perspective of it being a form of argumentative writing, and you'll see that as I go through this presentation. I'm going to happy to take questions at the end. Hopefully I can keep it down to 45 minutes so we can have 15 minutes for questions. But I've been known to be slightly verbose, again, English person. But I did work in sponsored programs here when it was called that for 7 years on doing research administration. So I've seen many, many grant applications, and then I moved into a research development capacity. So research development is what happens before grant submission. So we help with the whole proposal development process and really get into the weeds with our clients. So the slightly grandiose title of this is The Art and Science of Grant Writing. And we're going to talk about some basics. We're going to talk about doing research into the grant opportunity, preparation, and you'll notice that half of this is before you even start writing, and that's by design. Then we'll talk about actually writing a proposal and getting into the anatomy of really is kind of anatomy of the project summary or specific aims page, but that is what forms the roadmap for the rest of the proposal. And you'll hear me using NIH terms because most likely that's going to be the agency. Some of you might be USDA, I would imagine, but NIH is going to be the primary agency that you will probably be thinking about applying to as your careers advance. And then, of course, rejection, which is an important, vital part of the grant proposal and submission process. So in terms of finding funding, just going to touch on this very briefly. Actually, probably the best form of finding funding as you go on in your careers is your colleagues and finding out what they are applying for, what opportunities they've noticed. So colleagues and networks, both within and outside of your immediate area and within and outside of your institution as you sort of go to conferences and talk to people there. But we do have a number of resources available at UGA. And if you go to another institution, they will have, if it's a research one institution especially, they will definitely have similar resources. We subscribe to a service called Pivot, Community of Science, which is available through the library's homepage. And that is a service that aggregates grant opportunities from federal funders, from nonprofits, and basically you can search. It has a pretty robust search engine, so you can search for specific terms. There may be obscure foundations that you don't know about that fund research in your area. One that comes to mind is, for example, once I reviewed a proposal to the American Quarter Horse Foundation, which I didn't know was a thing until somebody found the opportunity on Pivot. And the libraries know how to help with that, help get you set up and to guide you and show you some of the features of that. Grants.gov is, of course, the federal repository for all grant opportunities that come from the federal government. So you can check on that every so often. It does not have a super robust search feature, but you can sort of easily scan to see. You can search by agency to see what's coming up. We and other universities have a corporate and foundation relations or equivalent, and that is generally they accept gifts. So they're the people who, when sometimes gifts come in and they're earmarked for a specific purpose or a specific person, but they can also handle some grants, and especially foundation grants. They're a resource for foundation grant development. So this slide is labeled the go, no-go decision, because that's an important part of thinking about grant writing, because you don't want to spend a large amount of time submitting a proposal that for one reason or another is not going to have a very good chance of success. So it's really important to remember that, there's a point where you have to make that decision, but it is always okay to say, for whatever reason, this isn't a good match, or you need to wait for another grant cycle or find a different opportunity. So in order to get to that decision point, the first step is to close read the solicitation. And the solicitation is a generic term for the guidelines that the sponsor issues for that specific grant opportunity, or it might be more general guidelines. And an example is, of course, with NIH, the R01 is the most common thing that people apply to. And there's a generic R01 solicitation where pretty much they will accept, they will consider any sort of type of proposal. There are no specific, they don't have a specific agenda. But then you will have requests for applications or which are very specific. They're interested in getting proposals that will address a specific area of concern to that institute or center. And those will have a lot of information about exactly what they want. Sometimes in fact, they're kind of overwritten and there's too much information about what they want and you can't possibly satisfy everything, but you can sort of tell whether your research would fit into the framework that they are presenting in those more specific solicitations. So close reading the solicitation is very important. We'll talk more about that. This is the research page. So you need to familiarize yourself with the sponsor's mission, look at what they've funded, and other resources they provide. And for NIH, most of the federal agencies have a good awards search function. NIH has a great one called NIH Reporter. And you can search, it's a robust search engine. You can find abstracts. All of the abstracts are published, so you can see what they funded and see whether it matches your research. And from that, you can sort of determine whether your research is a good fit for that particular, in case of NIH, institute or center or foundation or whatever it is. In most cases, it's possible to talk to what I've called generically here a sponsor representative. So that's usually a program officer or program official. And there are, ways to do that. Good ways to do that and bad ways to do that. You don't want to cold call them. You want to send out an email of inquiry with just a few lines about what your questions are and what you're going to propose, and then set up a time to talk. And some of them will prefer to talk via email. But for federal sponsors especially, they expect that part of their job is to talk to prospective proposers and answer their questions prior to actually submitting a proposal. They would much rather have a proposal. If it's not going to fit, they can tell you that. Also, there are some times where a specific program will have a certain budget over, say, 2 or 3 years, and they will accept proposals and fund them on an ad hoc basis, but there comes a point where the money runs out. So one thing you want to do is make sure that they are actually still funding proposals in that area before you lunge forward and write a proposal. And then, so thinking about work versus reward, just considering how much work the proposal is going to take versus the amount of money that's going to come in. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, I think. And then finally, planning for salvage is what I like to call it, because most proposals are not accepted. So you want to think about what you can get out of the process of proposal writing. So that if and when your proposal is rejected, usually you can resubmit, but if and when it's rejected, then what have you gotten out of the process? What can you use for other purposes? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is a dumb title for this slide, but I'm sticking with it. If the Venn fits, write it. So this is a very simple but very important concept. So depending on who you're applying to, you have your research agenda, the research that you want to do, perform, propose. Your sponsor has various goals and a particular mission. So figuring out where the overlap is between your agenda and the sponsor's agenda is crucial, both to deciding whether you should actually apply for this and how you frame your proposal. Because you always want to make sure that the sponsor understands that you understand their mission, and you can argue for how your research will support that mission, because that's what they're going to be looking for. But you also don't want to force a square peg into a round hole. Probably one of these should be square instead of circular. And bend your research so far that it's not something you actually want to be doing just in order to apply for funding. And I have many examples of people who have been successful at getting funding that it turns out is way more work than they wanted it to be, and diverted them from what they actually enjoy about being a scientist or a faculty member. So really close read of solicitation. I can't emphasize that enough. I'm going to switch my share. This is going to require some nimbleness on my part to, of course, I don't have the right tab open. 1 second. All right. So just real quick, so this is the generic R01 program announcement, and I will enlarge it a little bit. Can you see that, read that reasonably well, Shannon? Thanks. It's a large amount of information, and a lot of it is important. Some of it is not so important, but going through and really taking the time to parse it out and figure out exactly what they want, exactly what the requirements are is absolutely probably the most crucial part of the grant writing process. Just to point out, it has obviously due dates and how you apply. NIH has standard due dates in February, March, May, June, and October, November. So the nice thing about NIH is you get 3 chances a year to apply, which makes it easy to delay if you need to do that. This is going to have a description. It's going to tell you what funds are available and the anticipated number of awards, which can start to give you an idea of what your chances of success are. The award budget, so you can sort of figure out whether the scope of work that you've imagined will fit into the budget that's allowed by the agency. Eligibility is important, and NIH, of course, we're going to be, as a research university, will be eligible for most NIH opportunities. But when you're looking at foundations, you want to make sure that they actually will make an award to universities. And so this lists all the different types of organizations that can apply. The next thing I wanted to hit on was, so the application and submission information is the nuts and bolts. And you'll see in here, so the solicitation is the specific instructions. And every federal agency also has a more general guide for proposals. So whatever's in the solicitation takes precedence over whatever is in the general guide. But since this is the generic R01, you'll see that they've listed the parts of the proposal, and they're just referring us to their general guide, which is called cumbersomely the SF 424 R&R application guide. It stands for Standard Form 424 Research and Related Application Guide. So as you're preparing your application and preparing all of these individual components, it's just saying use the instructions there. So you want to read those instructions and follow them to the letter, because the easiest way to get rejected is to not follow instructions. There's an element of technical writing to this that is very precise, more like computer coding than free-form writing. The other thing I wanted to hit in here is the application review information, and this is going to be, these are specific to NIH here, obviously, but every organization is going to have explicit or implicit information about how the proposals will be reviewed, what the merit criteria are that they'll be looking for, how it's going to be scored, and so on and so forth. So that's the end point that you're trying to get to. So as you're writing, you want to be thinking about these things. So the ones for NIH are significance, which is very important. The investigator, so that's quality of the investigator or investigators. Innovation is this something that is novel, innovative, and have potential to change the field. And then the approach is the meat of the proposal. And obviously that's super important. So the methodology, what your hypotheses are, how you're going to test them, what your methods are going to be. But the important thing to remember is that the audience, we'll get to this a little bit more later too, but the audience for a proposal is a crucial thing to be thinking about. For NIH, it's going to be a few people who know your area really well, and a lot of people who are scientists who don't know your area very well. And it's going to be a room of, say, 20 to 30 people. And you're going to have a primary reviewer and then a secondary and tertiary reviewer. And those are the only 3 people who will read your full proposal. Everyone else will have read your specific aims page, maybe, or maybe they will be frantically reading it during the study section itself. as the, as the main three reviewers are presenting. But the really important point there is that everybody scores your proposal, even the people who haven't read all of it, and your final score is the average of those scores. So thinking about how to balance the specificity of the science that will convince the people who are specialists that you're on the right track, and give them ammunition to, ways to talk about your research to people who are not specialists, is a very important way to thinking about that. Basically, you want to be able to find an advocate who can argue, who you can win over and argue for your proposal. So that's a way of thinking about proposal writing. It's especially important when you have a lot of people in the room who aren't necessarily super familiar with your specific area of research. So that's all we're going to do on that for now. Back to see how fast I can share, not screw things up. From current slide, there. And I have you guys covering my slides, so oops. So other important parts of preparation is find examples of proposals if you can. And so the places to get those from are from your colleagues. You can also contact either your sponsored projects office, ours is called Sponsored Projects Administration, or SPA, or your research development office. In that case, this is me in the Office for Proposal Enhancement, and ask, has anybody who applied to this sponsor or this particular program before? And we can give you their names, and you can contact them themselves, or we can ask on your behalf if they're willing to share their proposal so that you can see what a successful proposal looks like. And that's really useful. It's not always possible, but you can also look at, do an award search for the types of proposals that go to that program, and look at the abstracts. And sometimes there are websites and you can see what they're doing now. So there's just sort of a research phase where you can get a better idea of what has been successful in the past, so you can figure out how to frame your work in a way that sort of at least follows that a little bit. Institutional resources, again, your research or proposal development office can help develop proposals depending on how well they're staffed and what their mission is. So like I said, we don't have the staff to help grad students directly. Some, if you end up at an institution that is really heavily invested, they may have an office that helps directly with that. You want to let your sponsored projects office know you're applying as soon as you know you're applying, because they can answer a whole lot of logistical questions about how proposals get submitted, about what you need to do for certain items. They can fill out some of the generic forms for you, which are super routine for them, but can be befuddling to first-time or early career proposers. And then you may have assistants within your unit. And so, for example, VetMed has a whole grants office that can help with your proposals, and they're great. But again, let them know you're applying as soon as possible so that you can get on their calendar, and so that they can be ready when you're ready to submit to give them your proposal. And then, of course, experienced colleagues, mentors, faculty members who are willing to help. They're going to, in a lot of cases, they are super helpful. The one note of caution there is that there can be certain faculty members who who have a lot of knowledge about grants, but it is out of date. Because they may not have applied for an R01, they've just been renewing the same one for 15 or 20 years. So you have to be a little bit cautious about taking advice. Get as much advice as you can, but consider consider the source. Okay, and so this assumes that we've reached a go decision and we're going to submit a proposal. To move you guys again. So this again, pre-writing steps. So make a timeline. So a timeline and checklist is really what you want. So this is not just for the meat of the proposal, not just for the narrative or research strategy in the case of NIH. This is for all of the parts, because you don't want to get too close to the deadline and realize there are 3 different other documents you have to produce that you've never written before. That is panic-inducing and unpleasant. So the features of this are plan on multiple drafts and stagger those out so that you can give them to the outside readers who you've convinced ahead of time to help you with this proposal. You want to give them enough time so that they can get your draft, procrastinate a little, and then get it back to you. And so that can be a tough, you really want to get started early. Include everything in the timeline, like I was saying. So all of, even down to forms and ancillary documents like facility statements and biographical sketches and, the various little prose pieces that you might need to submit. The timeline should be aggressive in that you're setting, a high bar for yourself in terms of getting things done early so that you have time to revise, but doable. So don't drive yourself crazy. And staggered deadlines. So when you're sort of mapping this out, and I'll show you once again, I will switch my share with the same elegance as I did before. This one should be a little easier. This is an example. Yep, everyone should be able to see this. So it's pretty elaborate, and this is actually for a what is called a K99R00 proposal, and it's for a postdoc to transfer to an independent course of research. So it's a very specific mechanism that NIH has, but this template can be modified really easily, and we have various templates for this on our website. So I've just listed every single component that is required on the left side of the page, and then found a place in this timeline for each of these things and for each stage of the process. So this proposal isn't due until February 14th, but the timeline starts November 8th. And that's partly because this happens to be a fairly complicated proposal that requires a lot of buy-in from the candidates' mentors. And they're busy people. So you have to give them enough time to produce the documents that you need them to produce. So the main section of this is, you can see that for this proposal was candidate information and goals for career development, which is 12 pages, specific aims, and research strategy. Those are the main sections of it. And so I've given myself, if this were me, what sort of stage I want to be at each of these dates. So I want to have an outline by December 6th, what I call a draft with holes. So you've written some parts of the draft and you're still figuring out how to fill out some of the rest of it. A complete draft by January 10th, and that's the draft that you can share with other people. And then, hopefully you get feedback from them within a couple weeks and you can produce a revised draft and have it be able to spend enough time with it to make it as polished as possible before final submission. And my wife, who is the director of Sponsored Projects Pre-Award, requires me to mention that you need to aim to get your proposal in to sponsored projects or to whoever's going to submit the proposal on behalf of the university, because that's not going to be you. That's going to be the authorized official. 4 to 5 business days before the actual deadline so that they have time to fit it into their review schedules. At UGA, we submit around 2,700 to 2,900 proposals per year, which is a pretty incredible number. So the person who will be reviewing and submitting your proposal on behalf of the institution might have, 4 other proposals to review on that day. And you want to give them enough time so that if they find something egregiously wrong with your proposal, you have enough time to fix it, and are not sort of scrambling to put in something that is not up to snuff, because that is, again, a very frustrating feeling to have spent all this time on this and not to have produced something that is of the highest quality. So that is the sort of example timeline. Again, we have more of these on our website, proposal enhancement. So stop share, reshare. Current slide. Okay. Again, still in the prep phase. So creating an outline that's based on the solicitation. So even with a generic solicitation, that's pretty clear. An NIH R01 has a 12-page research strategy. So you have an introduction, you provide some background, you talk about the significance and innovation, then you get into methodology and what you're actually going to be doing. And then hopefully end with a conclusion that ties everything back together. But some solicitations, like I was saying, have a whole bunch of very specific things that they want done. So when you have one of those, it's especially important to just mechanistically go through, basically copy and paste the whole solicitation into a Word document and create an outline from yourself. And I like to frame things in terms of asking myself questions, so turning what they want into questions for myself. And I find that that is a helpful way to prompt you to be thinking about how each component of your research might, how you can present it as being responsive to that solicitation. So again, engage reviewers, and we're talking about internal reviewers. These might be faculty members, they could be, peers and colleagues. It's great to have someone like myself who is always a lay reader of any scientific document, because ideally your writing is so lucid that even a lay reader can sort of generally understand at least what the significance and the impact of your research would be. So finding someone who is scientifically literate lay reader is a great thing to do as well. Set aside small blocks of time over a long period. You do not want to be spending 40 hours in the last 3 days on a grant proposal. It's just exhausting and traumatic, and it does not produce good results. So you have to be able to be willing to prioritize, put the grant writing somewhere higher in the priority list than the very bottom. Otherwise, you'll keep pushing it aside and end up with an insurmountable amount of work at the very end. This is less relevant for NIH proposals usually, but there is something called the logic model. NSF actually often requires them, and they're used in all kinds of different sort of academic endeavors. So just very briefly, this is an example. The reason that it's helpful to do something like this is it is very easy to get bogged down in what you're going to do and not convincingly explain why it is that you're going to do it. So a logic model, that's just a basic one, thinks about the inputs, which in this case is going to be the funds that you're getting, mostly the funds you're getting from the agency and the resources that are available at your institution. And you will think about what the activities that you want to do are, but then you want to think about outputs, which are the immediate products of those activities, and then short and long-term outcomes. So also known as impact. So what is going to be made possible through this research that would not have been possible before? And the reason it's good to be thinking about that at the beginning is that you can view your whole proposal through the lens of what is the impact going to be, so that reviewers are clear on that. And that's going to, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. In terms of structure, ideally, I'm a big fan of the hourglass structure because it keeps readers from getting lost. And basically, a paragraph or a section of the proposal introduce, I mean, this is kind of goes back to the 5-paragraph essay. I don't know if they're still teaching that in high school or not. But having a clear topic sentence is actually very important, both for paragraphs and sections, so that readers know what they're supposed to be thinking about. And then what does the reader need to know to understand the details? Then you get to the details. But then at the end of the paragraph or the section, you go back out to what the bigger picture is. So how is this information? How is this experiment? How are these hypotheses going to produce the eventual outcome or impact that you're hoping to have? It's important to remember that what you're doing here is arguing for funding. So you're not trying to present what is interesting, except insofar as you need to get the reviewers interested in what you're proposing. So unlike an academic article, this is not, you're not sort of generally contributing to the body of science. You are doing something, so everything in your proposal needs to have some sort of purpose and be related to sort of answer the question directly or obliquely. Here's why you should give me money to do this. I have signposts here. Signposting is a term we use in rhetoric and writing where you refer back to refer to stuff that's going to come, refer back to things that were before. It's basically providing guideposts for the reader so that they don't get lost. Because again, remember, these people are reading dozens of proposals in some cases, and it is pretty hard to if your proposal is disorganized and people can get lost in it, it is pretty hard to get them to fund you. Again, so know your audience, who the reviewers are. In NIH's case, that's easy because they post who is going to be in a study section. So you can even sort of do some research on those people and see what their backgrounds are. And so try to how much you need to explain some of the stuff, the basic science that you might take for granted, but somebody who's not in your discipline would need an explanation for. And there's a balancing act between providing too much explanation, obviously, and so little that somebody gets lost and bored. If there are multiple audiences, my favorite example of this is I worked on a proposal to the Department of Homeland Security to create special nano fiber vests. And the people who were reviewing that were scientists, firemen, other first responders, administrators for DHS, just this really heterogeneous group of people. So it was a real challenge to think about how to write a proposal for people who had super detailed technical knowledge and then super detailed practical knowledge. And so, but that's an important part of the writing process. And again, write towards an advocate. So, you know, in that case, you want to give the fireman who's reading it, you know, enough information about how this would benefit them in their like daily operations that they can say, okay, yeah. So what they're saying is, you know, if this fabric has this cooling property, it will help, you know, in these sorts of situations. And the scientists, you know, you want to be able to explain how the nanofabric works, like what its durability might be, all that sort of stuff. And then this is important, understand the reviewer's apples and oranges, and I have kumquats and scuppernongs, but you can include whatever exotic fruit you want to in there. Problem, and that problem is that you may have a great project that is really well thought out, where the experimental design is excellent, and somebody else might have a project that fills all those boxes as well. And reviewers are put in the position of saying, okay, well, what is the significance and impact going to be comparatively between these two things that are otherwise equally meritorious? So they have to, and it might be on completely different subjects. So that's why it's so important to explain what the significance and potential impact is in NIH, and this is especially important for vet med students and faculty to think about, is you have to really explain what the human health impact is going to be. That's the most important. That's the reason that probably the number one reason that NIH proposals get rejected is because you haven't adequately explained how this is actually going to benefit human health. So that's one of the things that the reviewers are evaluating. Will this proposal benefit human health more than this other proposal? If you have a really obscure disease, you might have a great way of addressing it, but if it only affects 30 people, it's going to be hard to argue that this other proposal that might be less revolutionary, but will help 1 million people. It's hard for them to say, well, we're going to fund that first proposal. Let's see, how are we doing on time? 12:42. As I said, I tend to go long. So we'll move through this fairly quickly. This information is actually mostly available at NIAID, the National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases, headed by Anthony Fauci, who has been in the news once or twice in the past couple of years. They have a great sort of how-to guide to how to write an NIH application that is so good that I've been able to adapt it to basically any sort of proposal writing context, including proposals to, like, for example, the National Endowment for Arts, because there are certain components that every proposal needs to have. So Hook, this is sort of targeted at writing a specific aims page, but it also works for any sort of proposal summary. And the idea is that this sort of first page, which again might be all some reviewers read, is the roadmap or sort of provides the framework for the rest of your proposal. So this is the introduction, and then you're going to elaborate on all of these things throughout the proposal narrative itself. So the hook needs to capture the reviewer's interest. It needs to emphasize the importance of the topic in a way that is interesting and not just, 1 million people die from malaria every year. Like, that's going to be too generic and common knowledge. You need to find a way to present that information in a way that is more interesting. It's a tough task. So then there's an introduction where you have to provide enough background, and exactly the right amount of background, ideally, that leads non-experts from what they know to what they don't know. So starting with the oldest facts that are relevant to the frontier of your field and moving through to the specific knowledge they need to understand your research, and figuring out how much background information to provide. That's someplace where a lay reader can be really helpful, because they should be able to follow that and sort of get why your research is important as you lead them through the background. Very important is you need to clearly identify the gap in knowledge that you're going to be filling with your research. So that gap dictates the logic of the rest of the proposal, because everything is aimed at filling that gap or gaps. And in some cases, it won't be a gap, it will be a lack. Whatever it is, and that could be a lack of equipment, training, or programming, or some sort of medical device, for example. But the idea is that the gap in knowledge should link back to what is known. So once you've provided this background, it's clear why this gap needs to be filled. You need to provide what the critical need is for this research. So that's basically taking your gap and framing it as a problem that needs a solution. So what is the knowledge needed to fill in the gap? What are the consequences? This is a great question to ask yourself. What are the consequences of failing to meet the need? What's going to happen if somebody doesn't develop this, therapeutic technique? Or what's going to happen if we don't take research in this direction? then explaining what the objectives of the proposal is, and just stating those in a very clear and matter-of-fact way, defining what you'll accomplish if it's funded and your research is successful, and framing it in terms of how how you're going to meet the critical need that you've expressed earlier, and then positioning this as the next step toward your long-term goal. So it's important to make sure that reviewers understand that this is part of a overall research agenda, and that if they fund this, not only are you going to produce something that is of value through this proposal, but you'll also be advancing a bigger research agenda that will produce, further results down the road. The rationale is where you answer the question, why bother? So why do you want to do the research? This is my favorite question. What will become possible that is not possible now? That's also where you can get reviewers excited about the possibilities of your research, and you want them to be excited so that they pay attention through the less interesting parts of the proposal, the inevitably less interesting parts. For me, that's usually the methodology, but that's also because I'm not a scientist. And link back to the consequences of not doing the research. So for NIH, the specific aims, just very briefly, this is sort of the general sort of guideline for what to do and not to do in specific aims. So you're explaining how you'll test your hypothesis, and I think I should have had a hypothesis slide earlier. But the aims should be global and open-ended. You want to avoid a descriptive approach. You don't want to say, here's what we're going to do. You have plenty of space in the proposal for that. You want to focus on impact and outcomes. And one of the things that is the second most likely cause of proposals being rejected by NIH anyway is that your specific aim number 2 depends on a certain outcome of specific aim number 1. And that's not consonant with hypothesis-driven research, because you have to you have to be able to be wrong and yet find a way to go on to the next aim. So if aim 1 totally fails and you're out of luck, that's not going to be a recipe for success for the rest of the project. And I have a slide here on non-hypothesis-driven research that we won't go into. And then there are important but more auxiliary parts of a proposal. So demonstrating your capacity, that's what we were talking about with environment, which I didn't go into, and investigator, sort of proving that you and your institution have the ability to perform the research. And how much you need to spend on that is going to depend a lot on the type of proposal that it is. But here, there's a list of some types of resources that you want to emphasize are available to the project. And then sort of this is the conclusion of a specific aim page, and you should always carve out some space at the end of a proposal to get to these components. They are important. So again, sort of reiterating what the long-term goals are, what the outcomes and deliverables will be at the end of this project. So if we do this, here's what will be produced, and here's how it has the potential to impact society broadly and or your field. What sort of impact will it have? If you have innovative components, if you're using new techniques or methodologies, having one of the outcomes being a proof of concept of those is a really good thing to emphasize. But the purpose is to inform reviewers on on the return on investment. Again, to put this in crudely monetary terms, because this is the world we live in. They're going to give you money. What are they going to get in return? And you don't have to be, mercenary or completely transactional about it, but that is something to keep in mind as you're writing. And placing your proposal in a wider context within the field, within society, that's sort of, again, the hourglass, broadening out to the big picture. And you don't want to be grandiose about it, but it's important to remind reviewers of what might be able to be produced. And it's also a chance to keep them, again, excited about the proposal. Really quickly, rejection. Be prepared for it. So thinking about what you can salvage from the proposal process, which is arduous. So first of all, obviously, and this is especially true for you guys because you're near the beginning of your careers, is you get practice. And like with everything else, you improve with practice. It helps you, for some people, the writing process helps you to develop your ideas, especially if you're bouncing them off of other people and they are able to ask you, tough questions. And you have to go back to the drawing board and think about how to address those questions. Because research is collaborative, the process of proposal writing, you will have to engage other people. And so forming new collaborations, new networks, new relationships that can bear fruit down the road is one way to profit from the process, even if you're not accepted for funding. Getting your foot in the door. So there are cases, a lot of cases where, you are, review panel might be looking at your proposal and saying, well, this isn't really fundable here, but this is really interesting. And there's a chance that you'll have those same reviewers later on, and they'll remember you. And this is kind of more applicable for more experienced faculty. And then, of course, you've written a bunch of stuff that you can reuse and cannibalize for other purposes, poster presentations, conference presentations, new lines of research. Once you've written enough proposals, you're sometimes able to basically cut and paste and adapt sections of them into future proposals. So you are developing an arsenal, or to use a non-military metaphor, a stockpile. I guess that's still military. A stockpile of resources that you can adapt to other contexts. When you do get rejected, use your reviews. And one of the things that my office does is help people develop a resubmission strategy where we help you go through the reviews, figure out which critiques to address and how to address them, and then sort of keep you on track in terms of developing that resubmission. But that's going to be down the road for a lot of you. Here is the link to our website. We have a lot of resources on there. Some of them are slightly out of date, but I'm happy to provide updated versions. We're working on it. And it also has the contact information for both of the two people who currently work there, myself and Becky Kirkland, who just started last month, but is off to a flying start. I haven't actually been able to look at the chat, so please, go ahead and ask any questions that you might have, or maybe Shannon, maybe you can let me know what people have asked in the chat.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. That was really helpful. I think most of the folks that are probably on this call, again, are graduate students or interns or residents in the college. And one of the new offerings we have is this internal grant competition, where it's just a very basic, almost like a pre-proposal for a larger institution. Or a larger funding agency. And so very short, kind of 2-page maximum proposal where they can apply to our central office, kind of just graduate students and interns and residents, to be able to get just a small amount of money to fund their research. And I'm wondering if your office has any examples, again, more of like that pre-proposal, just kind of simple, this is what the basic structure would be, kind of. Otherwise, I can also kind of solicit some people within the college.
So I'm not sure. Let's see. I think they'd have to be anonymized, but I think something very useful there would be so limited submissions opportunities. So lots of agencies have some programs where they limit the number of submissions from any institution. And, so like for like an NSF proposal, they'll allow 2. And so we have to have an internal competition to determine who gets to be one of those 2 submitters to NSF. And that's about exactly the same thing. It's about a 2-page proposal that lays out the research. There's a section where they have to explain why this proposal would be especially competitive. But in general, it's a sort of a summary of the research, a little mini proposal. So I would get in touch with them and see if they are willing to anonymize some of those submissions and share those. And that's actually kind of a great idea.
It is.
So,
that would
and I
be
can,
very useful, I think, too.
yeah, and I can give you that contact information if you remind me.
Sure, yeah, that would be wonderful. How about any folks on the call? Do you have any specific questions for Jake?
And obviously we've just, I mean, that was a really fast flyby. There's way more that we could talk about with any of those. And, you know, it's going to be different for whatever type of one thing I didn't talk about really was fellowship type applications. And something to think about there is that often you're not promoting your research so much as you are promoting yourself as something for an agency to invest in. And that's true of like the NIH Kirstein proposals and various other types of fellowship proposals. So while all of that stuff is, all of the sort of elements of that are applicable, it's more of a focus on how to promote yourself as and yourself rather than your research as an investment opportunity. So for those of you who are working on that sort of thing, you have to think a little bit differently about how to go about making that argument.
And as I said in the chat earlier, I would encourage all of you to use this opportunity with creating these internal kind of proposals to look at some other external agencies where you could kind of retool what you've put together and kind of draft a proposal for an external funding source, because that will look wonderful on your CV. Again, even if it doesn't get funded, at least you're showing potential employers that you have done this before and you have the experience of you know, putting together some of these external proposals. So I think that would be a wonderful opportunity too.
And if you are funded, I mean, so one of the great things about that is then you can leverage that into applying for, like you're saying, larger proposals. So it's like a seed money. And one of the big advantages that gives you is when we're talking about capacity or feasibility, being able to show that you have performed some of this work, that you have some preliminary data. That's not always necessary, but it is, you know, really helpful in terms of making that argument that that they'll get a good return on investment again if they do fund you.
Yeah, that is great advice. So any other questions for Jake? Well, I very much appreciate your time, and you've been a great resource, and hopefully we will be able to kind of use you in the future if specific questions come up for the graduate.
Always happy to answer questions. Sometimes I can't provide much more help than that or direct people to resources. We are hoping, working on expanding our office, which of course depends on all sorts of budget things that are beyond our control, but I would love to be able to help graduate students, because that's a real benefit to the institution, to get those early grant writing experiences under people's belts.
Yeah, it's a tremendous asset as you move on to your, you know, in a lot of different careers, but particularly if you're going into an academic career. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.